Good morning. The Ranter is back to go into yet another rambling diatribe of the news of the day. And I believe the news of the day is going to have to be the disqualification of Donald Trump from the ballot in Colorado. The decision by their Supreme Court, a 4-3 decision, I might add, stems from their belief of his involvement in the January 6th riot that broke into the Capitol, threatened the various lives of the Vice President and certain other elected officials, vandalized, assaulted police officers, and various other things in the aims of, protest, which means those who were outside of the line and were outside and legally protesting, which was their right to do so, and those who broke in who did not have the right to break in. Be that as it may. And when what Trump's involvement was that, given him and his associates at the rally prior to them marching to the Capitol, revving them up to do so, while Trump himself saying, let's go march down Pennsylvania Avenue, let's go, you all march down to the Capitol, I'll march with you, which he didn't. And his inability or unwillingness to answer the phone when the attack did happen, and the calls were coming in from congressmen and senators that were in the Capitol to governors of nearby states like Virginia and Maryland who were waiting for the authorization to let their National Guard in, while Trump himself reportedly was just sitting back and watching. And when Kevin McCarthy tried to bring up about the situation there, he apparently said to Kevin McCarthy, well, they seem to be fighting for me more than you are. Kind of an interesting implication there. So, with that as the reasoning of this disqualification, let's actually look up what this Section 3 of the 14th Amendment says. So, and allow me, because it is early in the morning and I haven't quite slept all that much, I'm going to have to show my age a bit, so forgive me if I ruin illusions. Okay. So, let's take a look at this. What does Section 3 of the 14th Amendment say? Section 3 of the Civil War era 14th Amendment says, no person shall hold any office, civil or military, under the United States who, having previously taken an oath as an officer of the United States to support the Constitution of the United States, shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid and comfort to the enemies thereof. This provision was mainly used between the ratification and in the aftermath of the Civil War and up to 1872 in enactment of the Amnesty Act, according to the Congressional Research Service report. This is from NBC News. Now, the reason why that is a point that I want to make here is when talking about this during a surprisingly fun back and forth live on video stream with my friend Vin, I mentioned Alexander Stephens. Now, Alexander Stephens was he was a Confederate. He originally was in Congress representing Georgia, joined the Confederacy. There's some contention of if he was secretly a Unionist or not, and was objecting to the secession and attacking Fort Sumter and any of that stuff. But be that as it may, he rose to the rank of Vice President of the Confederacy, helped write the Confederate Constitution, which includes such terminology within that Constitution as that, and I'm paraphrasing, is that they are brought together with this universal understanding that the black man was not going to be equal to the white man. So with that, it seemed to be kind of outrageous for the idea that while we have this clause of the 14th Amendment that was ratified in 1866, that he would show up in Congress in 1872. Now, so I had to look this up a little bit, little bit of research for this this Confederate jackhole, and find out why. Why did he skate underneath this vaulted Section 3 of this? Okay? So we're gonna do a little blurb here about Alexander Stephens. So once again, age. Okay. Post-war career. This is from the New Georgia Encyclopedia on Alexander Stephens. After the war, Stephens was imprisoned for 5 months at Boston's Fort Warren. Upon his release, Georgia citizens elected him in 1866 to the United States Senate under President Andrew Johnson's forgiving Reconstruction scheme. Northerners were naturally dismayed at the prospects of the Vice President of the Confederacy sitting in the Senate chamber a year after the Civil War ended, and the congressional Republicans refused to seat Stephens. He used the resulting hiatus from the public life to pen a constitutional review of late war between the states. From 1868 to 70, his 2 volumes Apology for the Confederacy. So he was already writing on this. Although not a member of the Bourbon triumvirate that ruled over a redeemed Georgia, Stephens rose once more to political prominence after Reconstruction. He returned to the U.S. House of Representatives in 1873, and he served there until 1882. That same year, he was elected governor of the state but died in office. On March 4th, 1883, Stephens' grave is on the front lawn of his Crawfordville home, Liberty Hall, and now state park maintained by the Georgia Department of Natural Resources. Alright, so he joined back to Congress in 1873. Now, why is that significant? How did that happen to skate underneath this issue of the 14th Amendment and him clearly being a rather significant Confederate of the Confederate government? Well, here's this is from the University of Minnesota's Law School Constitutional Commentary. The section involved the problem of Alexander Stephens. When the 39th Congress convened in December 1865, senators and elected representatives of ex-Confederate states showed up ready to take their seats. Among those members elected were many rebel leaders, including Alexander Stephens, the Confederate vice president, 2 Confederate senators, 4 Confederate congressmen, and several military officers of the Confederate Army. The presence of these unrepentant rebels infuriated most Republicans in Congress, as the Joint Committee on Reconstruction explained in its report. The elections in the South resulted almost universally in the defeat of candidates who had been true to the Union, and in the election of notorious and unpardoned rebels, who made no secret of their hostility to the government and the people of the United States. The Joint Committee thus recommended the exclusion from positions of public trust of at least a portion of those whose crimes had been proven to them to be enemies of the Union and unworthy of public confidence. Alright, so again, this is the background as to why these people showed up, because they got elected by their states during Reconstruction, or right after the Civil War, rather, and the Republicans in the Senate and the House, Northerners, were not all that happy for it, and this is where we get essentially the birth of Section 3 for the insurrection clause of the 14th Amendment. So the question is again, how did Stephens skate? Well, he went in 1873. In 1872, a new bill came and went called the Amnesty Act. Now, Let me get you the details on that. Let's see here. Hang on. Where are we at in this? The Amnesty Act came down in 1872, and after which it removed the disqualifiers for former Confederates. It pretty much ended at the time that the Reconstruction seriously ended. So it actually became kind of a compromise in order to maintain the peace that that former Confederates would be able to return to public office, as Alexander Stephens did do. I had like a whole official thing on that, but it fled from me, so we're not going to worry about it. Disqualification clause does apply. So there is the little history lesson in terms of those you may feel might be might have been people that would have been involved with not being involved in our government, but were able to escape through the Amnesty Act. So this section primarily was operated and dealt with during that time, between the end of the Civil War and up to the point of the ending of Reconstruction. So it was rarely been used after it. It has been used before. Little details about in 2012, actually in Colorado, where I think the state attorney general challenged a candidate based on them to not be allowed in the presidential. I think the presidential election of that point, because of being not being a naturalized citizen, I believe. And ironically enough, the judge that was on that case was Neil Gorsuch. So there's a little interest in there. So with all that background, that my sleep-deprived mind is foggily trying to convey to you, let's fast forward back to our modern day, and with what we see with Donald Trump, and why this may be necessary for those who believe it's necessary, why this is maybe an overreach and something that can be appealed or wherever, and of course my own opinion on the matter when I come up to it. But here's another thing. Colorado is not the only state that is doing this, and I'm going to go through that right now. So, from the New York Times, an article involved saying that here are the other states where Trump's ballot eligibility faces a challenge. At least 16 states beyond Colorado currently have an open legal challenge to former president's eligibility for office, but what happens next depends on the Supreme Court. This week's decision by the Colorado Supreme Court to disqualify former President Donald J. Trump from holding office again was the first victory in a sprawling legal effort that is still unfolding across the country. At least 16 other states currently have pending legal challenges to Mr. Trump's eligibility for office under the 14th Amendment, according to the database maintained by Lawfare, a nonpartisan site dedicated to national security issues. The lawsuit argues that he is barred because he engaged in an insurrection with his actions surrounding the Capitol riot on January 6, 2021. For 4 of those lawsuits in Michigan, Oregon, New Jersey, and Wisconsin have been filed in state courts. 11 lawsuits in Alaska, Arizona, Nevada, New York, New Mexico, South Carolina, Texas, Vermont, Virginia, West Virginia, and Wyoming have been filed in federal district courts. Cases in 2 of these states, Arizona and Michigan, were initially dismissed by the lower courts but have been appealed. Another challenge has also been made in Maine. Trump's campaign has said it will appeal the rulings in Colorado in which the state Supreme Court says it will put its decision on hold, meaning that it is not in effect until January 4th, in hopes of receiving guidance from the United States Supreme Court. Quote, "We are also cognizant that we travel in uncharted territory and that this case presents several issues of the first impression," quote unquote, the Colorado justices wrote, noting that their decision could change based on, quote, "the receipt of any order or mandate from the Supreme Court," unquote. If the U.S. Supreme Court agrees to hear the appeal, the Colorado Supreme Court's hold will be temporarily lifted, and Mr. Trump will be eligible to be placed on the state's Republican primary ballot until the nation's top court reaches a decision, according to the Colorado Department of State. Such an appeal would also likely freeze the other lawsuits. Quote, if the Supreme Court takes the cases, it will effectively stay the proceedings in all other states," said J. Michael Luttich, a retired appeals court judge who was a leading supporter of bringing the 14th Amendment challenge. 9 of the active federal cases were, in fact, brought by John Anthony Castro, a long-shot Republican presidential candidate who filed challenges in 27 states regarding Mr. Trump's eligibility on the ballot under the 14th Amendment, as well as the case with the Supreme Court. In October, the Supreme Court said it would not take up Mr. Castro's challenge, and federal judges in Florida, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire have dismissed his lawsuits. He voluntarily withdrew suits in 12 other states. In Maine, the Secretary of State is expected to rule in the coming days on the challenge to Mr. Trump's ballot eligibility. The process in Maine is slightly different than other states. A provision in state law allows residents to challenge ballot eligibility, and the Secretary of State hears the challenge first. Then either party can appeal that decision to the state's Superior Court. Meanwhile, the nation's attention will focus on whether the U.S. Supreme Court will take up the Colorado case. If it declines, Mr. Trump will be ineligible to appear on the Colorado ballot, according to the Colorado Department of State. The Supreme Court will face some pressure from the political calendar, as Jean Griswold, the Colorado Secretary of State, indicated on MSNBC on Tuesday night. Her office must certify which candidates are on or off the ballot by January 5th in order to print the ballots in time for the state's primary election 2 months later. A host of other states also hold their primaries on March 5th, known as Super Tuesday, including several with pending lawsuits. Virginia, Texas, and Vermont. Alaska also holds its caucuses that day. Federal deadline for election officials to send absentee ballots to military and overseas voters in 45 days before the day of election. For South Carolina, an early nominating state with pending lawsuit, that would be January 10th, according to the South Carolina Secretary of State's office. All right. So, yeah. There's other stuff that I was going to pull up here, which I may go ahead and read when it comes up in my foggy train of thought here. But as I heard, for the people who object to this, is that, Trump wasn't convicted of anything. There wasn't a trial. It wasn't really an insurrection. It was just a riot. He wasn't involved in insurrection. Okay. So, I had this thing on Twitter. People call it X. Fuck X. It's Twitter. Whatever. So I had this conversation where the guy that was disagreeing with this say that it wasn't an insurrection, but he said that Biden's an insurrectionist because of illegal immigrants, and I had to send him the definition of what an insurrection is, which is violent uprising against the civil or federal government. And didn't hear an answer about that, but then again he says, well, Biden's also a pedophile. Well, okay, but that doesn't make him insurrectionist either. But however you want to term either Trump's involvement on January 6th, or however you want to term what happened on January 6th, because so many dazzling spray of flights of fancy on that day seems to fly a whole lot easier so many years after the fact. I mean, we're down we're going to be to 3 years of this. If it was just a mob of people that was just pissed off on any other day, if they were protesting on January 5th, January 4th, January 7th, you know, then I may be on that, yeah, these people were just protesting and they went out of bounds and it wasn't an insurrection. No. January 6th, the day of the vote certification, while that was going on, the machinations in the background by Trump and Trump supporters in politics and so forth were trying to set up fake electors. Trump and Ronna McDaniels, in a recent discovery of a recording, were trying to pressure 2 Republicans from a county in Michigan to not sign the certification. They were browbeating them to not sign. Now, isn't that election interference? When you read again what Section 3 says, now let's go back here and read again what Section 3 says. No person shall hold any office, civil or military, under the United States who have previously taken an oath as an officer of the United States to support the Constitution of the United States, shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid and comfort to the enemy thereof. Alright. And people say that Trump wasn't an insurrectionist. He wasn't committing insurrection. Alright, if you wanna look at that from that angle, alright, let's entertain that thought. That he wasn't actively being an insurrectionist. That he wasn't actively on the ground, waddling his way, squeezing through a broken window amongst those that he had incited to go into that broken window, who broke that window in order to get through that window to break into the Capitol on the day of the certification vote. He gave aid and comfort. He made sure not to pick up the phone when the calls for the National Guard was being pled for from those who were inside the Capitol and from those local state governors who wanted to authorize and activate their own National Guard to walk in. That's giving aid and comfort. And when you think about it, if you still, for some reason, you don't see him not calling the National Guard to be aid and comfort, think on this. When he finally had to get off his ass and make 2 statements, one on Twitter, which was too soft and too light, and we love you and we love everything you do, and the second one where he actually said for them to go home. They went home from his word. Do you think they were going to go home under any other reason? When he said for them to leave, they left. They were there for him. Earlier in the day, they were revved up to make that march for that protest turned into a riot. And because of the day and what was happening on that day, that riot became an insurrection, because that is a violent action against the processes of a civil and federal government, halting a certification vote. Consequently, if you want to take the flights of fancy of imagining the motivations of why, outside of the obvious, what would there be to gain for Trump if this action halted the certification? or this turned really violent, as it was being revved up to do so? Well, at the time of January 6th, Donald Trump was still President Trump, which means he would have the authorization and authority to declare martial law. If it proved that violent, to declare martial law, put a stay on the certification vote, and then that would give him enough time to sashay in his fake electors. And then all the certification challenges that the Republicans were putting up to delay the whole thing, that would be turned on its head, as these new electors would come in, and then this would be a completely different thing, and then he would stay president past January 20th, regardless of him being elected or not. The fake elector scam, him pressuring Republicans in that county in Michigan to not certify, his election fraud bullshit that started, honest to God, started before Election Day. We all remember when he would say, oh, well, if I don't win, then the election will be stolen. It'll be rigged. It'll be rigged. He said that months before Election Day. He had a built-in excuse of him losing. So yeah, I can see the point of view of those who brought the challenge of why he should be disqualified. His inaction to call the National Guard is the evidence of him giving aid and comfort to people who were committing an insurrection. Because as I said, if it was any other day that it was a riot that came from a protest with a pivotal moment in history of our election processes not happening, then it would just be a riot, which is bad enough. But on a particular day that they were all told to come, remember all the social medias and how this was going to be a 1776 moment, that he went onto Twitter and says, oh, well, it's going to be wild on January 6th. On this day, on January 6th, when the certification vote would to confirm Joe Biden as president, Occam's razor, which is the most obvious. These people were incited to not only march to the Capitol to protest it, break through the barricades, assault police officers to get their way into a building to halt the certification so that their precious Donald Trump that incited them would remain president. And he aided and comforted that endeavor by not answering the phone when they kept calling and begging him to call the National Guard, or at the very least tell them to go home. Maybe he wouldn't even need the National Guard if he just picked up the phone or put a video on to say go home. But no, he didn't want to do that because they were fighting for him. Fighting harder, as he said to Kevin McCarthy. Yeah. He deserves it. Now, as somebody who's obviously, for all the videos that I've done, completely tells you my opinion of Donald Trump, that he is an unqualified, disqualified piece of shit that should never get anywhere near the White House, and when he was in the White House, proved that he could do nothing other than talk. Because he will talk a big game. We have seen it. We have talked a big game. But he will not act. He will not take the responsibility of himself to act. And somehow that's his, because he does have, and I credit him always to being the master of perception as reality, rolls that perception out so that you think he's doing something when he's doing nothing. How many infrastructure weeks did we go through? The only time the last few years that we actually saw something on infrastructure, Joe Biden did it. Now, in terms of what is required for Section 3, which is stated, aid and comfort is what I consider is the bar that should be set, and it was set, and Donald Trump cleared that bar. But should he have been convicted? Should he be charged or accused of insurrection? Should he go through a trial process for that insurrection? Be convicted for it, as I said. Should that matter? So let's take a look here. Bag the whole showing my age thing. I'm now awake enough that I can actually see a little bit better, kind of. All right. Let me first help with the definition of giving aid or comfort to the enemy. This is from the CRS reports Congress.gov. Giving aid or comfort to the enemy. One who gives aid or comfort to an enemy of the Constitution of the United States is also disqualified from holding office under the 14th Amendment. This language appears to mirror that in the Constitution's Treason Clause, which defines treason in part as adherence to the U.S. enemies, giving them aid and comfort. Scant Supreme Court case law arising out of World War II defining the provision of aid and comfort indicates a mere association with an enemy is probably insufficient, but that otherwise innocuous acts may suffice if they are intended to provide material advantage to an enemy. There is also some indication of how aid or comfort was interpreted under Section 3 soon after its ratification. After the Civil War, during a hearing to determine whether John D. Young provided aid and comfort to the Confederacy and therefore was ineligible for the seat in the House of Representatives, the Committee of Elections was of the opinion that aid and comfort may be given to an enemy by words of encouragement or expression of an opinion from one occupying an influential position. One difficulty in applying aid or comfort prong is determining the proper definition of enemy. The term enemy is traditionally understood to encompass citizens of a foreign country in open hostilities with the United States. During the Civil War, the Supreme Court clarified that citizens of the Confederacy, while not foreign, may be treated as enemies as well as traitors. During World War II, Supreme Court determined that U.S. citizen who acted as a member of the belligerent invasion of the United States by joining a group of Nazi saboteurs who landed on the shores might be treated as an enemy. History therefore suggests that the enemy is one who owes allegiance to an opposing government and not merely a United States citizen opposing a U.S. government of a party thereof. So, as I said, even with this, his act or his inactions, I believe, constitutes giving aid and comfort. I mean, if you want to call them the enemies, this is where we get into the murky details upon all this. If it goes by the action of what was being done, then you might have to say yes, because it was to halt a political national proceedings in our federal government. That was the intent. To stop it in the name of somebody who lost an election. And he gave aid and comfort to that endeavor by not stopping it, by not telling them to go home, if not calling the National Guard. Should he be, again, the question is, should he be, convicted of such things beforehand? it doesn't seem to be required for that to be the case. And in actuality, when you think about it, probably wouldn't it probably best for it to not to be in that situation, and not because of it being the person that we are speaking of here. Now, again, it'll be the assumption that my opinion on this is because of what I've stated about Donald Trump. And that can be a motivating factor. That I can admit to that. But here's the thing. How many passes does this man deserve? How many regular people could able to sashay away from one responsibility to another responsibility to another consequence to another consequence? These actions were done in his name. He encouraged them to happen. Voiced his opinion of encouragement for this to happen. When speaking of this to Kevin McCarthy, saying that they're fighting harder for him than Kevin McCarthy does, that is admiration in their actions. And after the fact, he lied upon what was happening on January 6th. They weren't rioting. They were coming up and they were hugging and kissing police officers. They weren't assaulting them. What the fuck is that? This is someone who intentionally tells his supporters, don't believe with your eyes, just believe what he says. Now, one of the things I've heard upon one of the reasons why this shouldn't go down, and not for any truly legal reason one way or the other, is because of what may come from this. Of what the supporters and followers would do if this would backfire, spectacularly enough that it would give him more power and so forth. That can be a viable, reason not to do it. I mean, it's understandable. I won't say it's not understandable. But again, it goes back to my question: when does a person like Donald Trump get responsibility? Gets consequences? If your argument is he should be allowed to run and people should be allowed to vote for him if he wants to vote for him, okay, that's great. We did that last time around on 2020, and he lost his election. He lost his election by historical numbers. And I've said this before, and I'm going to say this again. Joe Biden may have won the presidency, but he did not beat Donald Trump because he's a damaged candidate for various reasons. Donald Trump lost because he was Donald Trump. That too many people, record number of people, did not vote for Donald Trump. It wasn't a matter who was on the ballot. They did not want to vote for Donald Trump. And that vast majority made sure of that this time around. Guys, remember, 2016, Donald Trump won, but he did not win the popular vote. And he sure as hell didn't win the popular vote this time. But the converse opinion of this is what will the Trump supporters do? What will these truly hardcore MAGA supporters do? Will there be violence if this goes through and this stays and he's ineligible to be on the ballot? If more states follow suit with Colorado, will there be violence involved in this? Perhaps. And here's the thing. And another disqualifying factor for Donald Trump is that after this ruling came down and he decided to rage against the dying of the light over this, He posted the pictures of the justices and reposted their court addresses. He does not deserve to be on a ballot, because that is a threat. If he is to be on the ballot again, just to appease the possibility of there being violence, and he loses again, do you think he's going to go away? Do you think his supporters are going to go away? That they're going to go, oh, we gave it the good fight, and we'll just go home now. That didn't happen in 2020. And once again, it was baked into the pie that they were going to cry election fraud. He brought that out months before. So, why should this person deserve another bite at the apple again, when he has done, his own actions have done enough for him not to be on it? But again, we're in this crazy situation, we're in this crazy political landscape where, hell, in 2022, a guy could win his primary vote in an election while in jail. Jail for killing his wife. On trial for that. But he still won. I guess he was properly not woke. Or maybe had problem with transgender teachers or drag story time or whatever, or whatever hot button taglines that would go, oh, he might be a convicted felon, that he might have just killed his wife, but gee, he will definitely own the libs. See, here's where we are in our political discourse right now. And in a perfect world, or a not so perfect world, maybe a world beyond maybe 10 years ago, I would agree with some of y'all who says that we shouldn't go down this route and disqualify him. That I would be idealistic enough to say, yeah, the country will understand. Let's put him on the ballot and let's have faith in our country that they will do the right thing. That, you agree that he shouldn't be president. I agree he shouldn't be president. But let the chips fall where they may, and let's have the vote. But that idealism, I am heartfelt sad to say, no longer applies. There is a great quote by the late, great grandfather of us all, George Carlin. Inside every cynic is a disappointed idealist. We grew up, those of us who were born in the late 70s, started our schooling in the 80s. I'm 45 now. My antics may not seem like I'm 45, but yeah, I'm quite middle-aged now. And remember, for people of us of a certain age, remember when we go to school and those little political, quasi-political, patriotic national songs that they would teach you before they taught the ABCs. They taught you before the 1, 2, 3s. Those songs to, supposed to ingrain your patriotism and your nationalism when you were tiny, when you were single digits old, where they had you look at a piece of fabric and say the Pledge of Allegiance, have your loyalty oaths every single day when you didn't understand what the words meant. But we had to do it. There it is. Well, there's a flag. That lovely strip of idealism. Or the great song, "This land is my land, this land is your land." Well, even back then, back in the 80s, there was another song, another version of that song. And it goes something like this. This land is my land. It is not your land. I got a shotgun, and you ain't got one. If you don't get off, I'll blow your head off. This land is private property. How many adults are singing that now? Especially for those who talk about the border, who really hardcore talk about the border. Inside, every cynic is a disappointed idealist. And I'm no longer that idealistic in thinking that this man will lose another election and will go away, that his supporters and those who are like him, who follow him, follow his model of success, who are as MAGA as he is, or sometimes worse, because some of these people in politics who are MAGA Republicans are probably more dangerous than Trump because they are actually politicians that actually know what they're fucking talking about. But they'll use his populist way of manipulating the perceptions of others into their politics and stir it up into a nice little bit of bile. We're to the point where Donald Trump can walk right up to the line of quoting Hitler with his rhetoric. Right up to that line, and people will defend it. Where he will say on day one he'll be a dictator, and people will just defend it. You know, I think it's not a matter of me being like Trump derangement syndrome here. I think he actually believes it, that he wants to be a dictator, and I can understand why for him. That he wants his cabinet to be nothing but loyalists. You don't have to know shit about the job so long as you're loyal to him. We saw that in the last go around with his Trump administration. So yeah, I think he should be disqualified from the ballot. I think at some point there has to be consequences for actions. And if it can't be criminal consequences, if some of the stuff is not considered technically crimes, or we have to tiptoe around, these type of measures and decisions, then it should be the consequence of not being at the head of the table for another 4 years. For the sake of the country. And when it's asked, what do we tell Trump supporters? What do we tell Trump supporters? Trump supporters are not going to like that. Honestly? Why do we need to tell anyone anything? Those hardcore Trump supporters doesn't give a shit of what anybody I say or anyone on anyone's side who is not loyal to Donald Trump. As quickly as they would burn a Democrat or a progressive liberal, they will burn a Republican if they say boo about Donald Trump. Look at the Republican nominees for president. Or excuse me, the nominees of who wants to kiss ass enough of Donald Trump to be on his cabinet. The only person on that stage who has the balls to say anything about Donald Trump is Chris Christie. And Chris Christie will never get anywhere near that White House because the Republican Party sees of the fan base that sees him being so anti-Trump. So he cannot possibly. But those others who are supposed to be vying for the presidency, even though he's way ahead in the polls and they are fighting for their 2 digits and single digits to try to be that second and third place in line, they fight without ever mentioning the name of Donald Trump. Not say one word, because we wouldn't want to harm our chances with the dear MAGA supporters. But it doesn't matter. So they're going to all flare out and fade away, and it will just be this man who's under 91 different criminal court cases and civil cases, who took home documents from the White House to Mar-a-Lago, which he shouldn't have. The defamation lawsuit with E.J. Carroll. The election manipulation and interference in Georgia. January 6th in D.C. Mar-a-Lago documents from Florida. His actions on January 6th. His words thus far, where he is deteriorating in front of your eyes. Swear to God, every time I hear anybody talking about Biden and his decline, which I also come up and say, in my own opinion, that he is in, and ignore Donald Trump's own decline, you're out of your mind, or you are faking not seeing it. You're putting on the blinders because of your desperate need to own the libs and to win with the dancing bear that entertains you so much. The derangement syndrome goes both ways, ladies and jelly spoons. Because as deranged as we who oppose Donald Trump may be, those who are so supportive hardcore are also deranged, just coming in the other direction. And you have to separate with a crowbar the difference between Republican voters who look at the hand that they're dealt with, and the only reason why they're going to vote for Donald Trump is because of there being Joe Biden. But they're not MAGA, they're not anything, they will swallow the bitter pill and try to ride it out like they did last time around with him. And then there are those who are the true believers. There are those who venerate him up to making him a religious icon. You talk about us who dislike him and how we dislike him and how we, make him infernal and abyssal. You all make him the second coming of Christ. Which one of us is deranged here? Could it be both of us? Now, if this goes to the Supreme Court and they overturn this, that's it. As it says in the article, that freezes up all the other attempts. And I'm not going to have a problem with that. Because at some point, we all have to tap out at some point. And the problem is that Trump never seems to want to live in that reality. He did so much when he lost the election to try to keep the power. From fake electors crying and bitching and moaning about an election that was stolen, that was not stolen, to spending weeks with his minions on social media, revving up, getting the boys together, the boys and girls together for January 6th is going to be wild. Going on there and doing that speech, saying, march to the Capitol and I'll march with you. Fight like hell. All of that, and everything he said after which, from all of his lawsuits, all the dehumanizing, demeaning, shitty, horrible things that he would do, either say about the judges or the judges' clerks or the prosecution or E.J. Carroll or anything else that ever pisses him off, including these Colorado justices of their Supreme Court who he gave out posted pictures and their addresses. All of that is why you should be disqualified. If you do not get this, you don't understand this, or you choose not to understand this, or you understand this perfectly, however you don't care because of the sake of politics, then I don't need to tell you the reasons why you should be disqualified. He is. Whether he's on the ballot or not, he is disqualified. Call that derangement? Fine. I don't care. I am not going to leave the country if Donald Trump becomes president. No matter how much I will loathe it, he will be my president, as he was my president for 4 years. And I dealt with it. I expressed my First Amendment right of my opinion of it, but I never denied he was my president. And if he wins again, he'll be my president. And what a future of our politics is going to be. In this post-Trump world, we'll never go back to normalcy ever again. That we have to make and forge a new normal. That we are seeing now. They complain about Trump getting impeached twice, and how that was useless, and that only backfired, and that was wrong, and this and that and whatever. I maintain that if in the light of consequences, it should be the right thing to do. But it is also it was completely partisan bullshit, one party thing, which we're now seeing now under Biden. The only difference is that the things that they want to impeach Biden for, if you can actually nail down anything, that they can seriously point to, which they don't. So it's always these vague smoking guns that is not really a smoking gun, but a gun that is smoking because it's malfunctioning. Like, ooh, this is a check from his brother. Ooh! Oh no, a check from his son. Ooh! From a truck loan. Ooh! Scary. Oh no, he emailed one of Hunter Biden's associates. His financial associates. Oh no. Oh wait. That associate actually worked for Biden in 2009. The stuff that they want to impeach him for were stuff that he wasn't even president for. Now, I don't think I ever slept in civics class, but some people have, because they think whenever things are done in the House, like the impeachment inquiry, oh, that's a done deal. They impeach him in the House, oh, that's a done deal, and forget about the Senate. But I was under the impression that you have to impeach somebody for the high crimes and misdemeanors that somebody does as president while he is president, not before. Donald Trump wasn't impeached for anything he did prior to the presidency. It was stuff he was doing while he was president. And there you go. And this is the new normal, that every other presidential candidate that's going to come down the pike, whoever wins the presidency after Biden, you guarantee that the opposing party is going to be coming up and finding some way to impeach him, because they were trying to impeach him Biden on day one. Or, at least Margie Taylor Greene was whining about that. And the funny part is, the only time that we had a presidential election that at least one candidate or another was not under an investigation, that last one would be Barack Obama. Because sure as hell, Hillary Clinton was under investigation while she was running for president. Let's not forget that. Alright, nearly an hour. So let's see if I can do another minute and seconds. Okay. So closing statements on this whole thing here. Do I think that he should be disqualified? Yes. Will I be pissed off and enraged if the Supreme Court overturn it? No. If he becomes president again, will I be pissed? Yes. Will he be my president? Yes. And I will remind this point. If there was another Republican that rose to be the nominee for the presidency, Joe Biden's in trouble. Conversely, flip that coin. If a Democrat rose, challenged Joe Biden, and won the nominee, usurping him to the position of being the nominee for the next president of the United States, Donald Trump is in trouble. These two men, these two old men, are the flip side of the same coin when it comes to being politically damaged. Blood in the water on both sides. And it is not a matter of one side beating the other side. It's the matter of whose side is hated the most. Joe Biden did not beat Donald Trump because people wanted to vote for Joe Biden. Joe Biden beat Donald Trump at a record level of votes because a record level of voting people in this United States did not want to vote for Donald Trump. And despite whatever Biden has done in the White House on how he handles the economy, how he handles the border, no matter how much that pisses me off too, that's why I'm not voting for him, that doesn't change the majority opinion, the vast majority opinion on Donald Trump. Alright, 1 minute and 1. I'm done. Ranter rants, as I have been doing for an hour, because the urge to rant is always rising. We will get into a wonderful detail of my opinion on the Republican nominees for the White House. Never going to happen for any of them. And various other topics. But until then, good morning. Maybe now I can sleep.